So do you have a really neat and special confirmation story? Hi, this is Gina Duke with Churchtown Ministries. Thank you for tuning in to ginaduke.com. You know, I want to share with you today my confirmation story, and it's something that's really special. And the reason I want to share it with you is because, one, I believe that as we hear other people's stories of how God led or directed them into a special or specific area, it helps us to clarify what He's doing in our own lives. And then also, I want you to understand how God does confirm things for us. We are sheep, and He leads us, and it's through these various ways that He confirms things for us that we're more able to see that it is He that is working in our lives. And so one of the things, a story that really stood out to me, and I was already an adult when I heard my Aunt Clarice tell this story, but she told of how my grandmother had felt called to minister the Word of God. But because she had 9 children, she didn't have a driver's license, she didn't know how to drive, she never felt like she could fulfill her calling to minister the Word of God. And I had never heard that before. You know, my grandmother, when you went to her house, it was like going to church. You were going to talk about Jesus. She read the Bible out loud. She sang hymns. She prayed out loud. And she just loved the Lord. There were some times where she would get up and help the preacher preach, which now explains a few things. Because she felt called to preach, I guess she decided every now and then she would help the preacher out. But as I drove home that day and I was processing that story, I just began to recall some things that had happened in my life. And one of those things is, I had already told you that I felt that I was called into ministry in 1994. I had always associated that calling with my younger daughter Callie's birth, because she was born in 1994. But then what I realized was that was also the year that Minnie Bell went to be with the Lord. And after her funeral, my aunts brought me her Bible and presented it to me and said, "We are now passing the mantle to you." Something that had been just a sweet gesture, I was now thinking is really part of my confirmation into ministry work. Another thing that I recalled, this happened when I was very young. My grandmother, Minnie Bell, lived in a trailer behind our house after my grandfather passed away. And one morning, early, I was really young, she come banging on our back door. We thought something was wrong. We ran to the back door to see what was the matter. And it was my grandmother, Minnie Bell. And she was all out of breath. She was so excited. And she was telling my daddy, "James, the Lord is going to call you to preach." And he said, "Now, Mama, the Lord's not calling me to preach, and you're not going to call me to preach." And as I thought about that story, I thought about how my grandmother so wanted her calling to be passed on to her children. That was her prayer. When she felt like she could not fulfill that calling, that her prayer was that calling would be passed on to one of her children. And I almost felt like the Lord was saying that was His way of showing her that calling that she felt unfulfilled was going to be passed down to the house of James, to my father's house where I lived. And so that was just a special part of that ongoing confirmation. So I pray that you take some time and think about confirmation stories. Also, I have this little bell. This is why I got this little mini bell. Because as I think about what God's called me to do, I want a reminder to be faithful not only to the call that God has given me, but to the calling that my grandmother prayed would be passed down to one of her children. And that has come to me, and I just want to be faithful with it. So be encouraged. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for following me to the cross at www.ginaduke.com. God bless.